Well, good afternoon and welcome, just as we have attendees joining us this evening for our next Bristol Housing Festival event. And I'm delighted that we've got a fantastic panel lined up. And this is one of the conversations that I'm particularly excited that we're tackling with tonight's topic, the value of social value. And just before we start this evening, because we're just going to give people a little bit of time to get into the room, I'm always conscious of these things, there's a bit of a lag. Please, if you've not had a chance, do go to the Bristol Housing Festival to have a look at the other things that we're running on this virtual expo for this year, including tomorrow morning. We've got another networking event gathering around the issue of creating carbon neutral communities. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved, but we're also focusing this year, not just on the physical building of homes, but on communities. And one of the things that you'll see on the website is we've had an opportunity to do a whole series of videos around people talking about, particularly in this season of COVID-19, what it is in their community that makes their community so special to them. So a focus not just on housing, but how that sort of key ingredient to our homes is also about that wonderful quality of community and how we're known and understood in the places that we live. In addition, you'll see on the website that we've got a whole feature there around In Conversations With. Each day we are releasing a video with people in the city who have got an important role about how we innovate, how we create affordable housing, both in terms of politics, in terms of charitable leads, but also in terms of people really leading that from the community side as well. So again, do have a look at the website. We've already published a series of videos and I think they'll be worth a look. But I'm particularly thrilled tonight because I think that driving all of this is this key challenge that we face around social value. What does it mean? How do we develop it? How can we make it become a really important and valuable part of our dialogue? And again, I think COVID-19 has only exaggerated the need for us to build wisdom into that decision making. So I think because we're so keen, we've got a lot of material to get through, and I'm keen that we have a chance to get lots of Q&A this evening. So I'm going to take a pause now, and I'm really delighted to welcome our chair this evening, Bev Hurley. Bev, I'm going to hand over to you to make a formal start to our event this evening, the value of social value.
Thanks very much, Jez. Welcome to all the participants and my fellow panelists. Really delighted to be chairing this session. It's a fascinating topic. I'm sure we're going to have lots of discussion, as Jez said. And I think it's one of the most exciting parts of the Housing Festival's virtual expo this year. We're being recorded, we're being streamed live on YouTube. So I hope this discussion is going to reach far and wide. So my name is Bev Hurley. I'm the chair of the Institute of Economic Development, the IED. That's a leading professional body for all those working in this broad area of economic development, which includes people concerned with skills, regeneration, business support, planning, housing, employment, skills, high streets, you name it. And in my day job as Chief Executive of YTKO, we work with communities, with businesses and individuals across the UK, particularly those in our more deprived areas, helping individuals start up new businesses and helping existing businesses grow. We've been in Bristol since 2010, so there are thousands of people and citizens in this lovely city that we've engaged with. We're also now working with Jez and others on a really exciting project focused on modular housing. And my first career actually was in social housing, so I feel like I've come home on this particular topic. So one of my personal drivers is helping to address the massive, entrenched and increasing inequalities in the UK. You know, we're one of the most unequal countries in the developed world, and it's getting worse. And I find that absolutely shocking. So this topic of social value is really close to my heart. I led the IED's research into social value in construction, which released its findings and recommendations just a couple of months ago. You can read the executive summary on the website. And we chose this sector because the estimated spend in construction is 500 billion by 2030. So if we could achieve the same amount again in tangible social value, that would start to make a real difference to some of these inequality challenges that we have. Amongst the findings were that it's a hugely fragmented landscape, social value, lots of competing models for evaluation and measurement, different procurement frameworks, different definitions of social value. Few local authorities had a clearly articulated social value strategy. Most people are focused on outputs, not outcomes. We didn't find much innovation, in fact, quite the contrary, in what was being procured and delivered, and often with no prior consultation with the recipients of social value activities. So a lot of it was identified by an absence of community engagement. And on both the public sector buying side and the construction delivery side, the lack of definition of social value and what counts as social value was the biggest barrier for both sides, coupled with a real lack of capacity, capability, and resources. So it was a pretty depressing picture. So I'm hoping that you who are listening, together with our excellent panel of speakers, will be able to solve all those problems in the next hour or so. And to echo what Jess says, we really want this webinar to be about sharing, learning, and discussion. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do a quick introduction and where they sit in the social value space. And by the time the last one has spoken, which will be Jez, I'd really like to see some questions, some views, some perspectives in the question and answer panel, please, so that we can get through as many of those as we possibly can. So without further ado, Andrew Van Doorn, can I ask you to say a little bit about yourself and what do you think?
Thank you very much, Bev, and really delighted to be here. And Jess, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Andrew Van Doorn. I'm the Chief Executive of HACT, which is the Housing Association's charitable trust. And we're a small organisation that basically works in innovation in social housing. And this year is our 60th anniversary. And we've been around for a long time working with people in communities to kind of drive new models and new ways of delivering housing. So this is really something that's core to my heart, to my being. And social value is a big area of our focus. What's really interesting is the title of this session, The Value of Social Value. And for me, there is no value unless we locate social value in the real lives of people and communities. Because actually what matters is us, and what matters is our well-being and how we improve our lives. And we are living at the moment in a moment of a housing crisis. We live in a moment of a poverty crisis. We have a health crisis. And unless we can address this, and we can work with people to unlock their assets in communities and their passions to make things change, to make things different, to address those inequalities, then we should all just go home. And for me, social value has to speak to that. So for HACT, we developed about 6 years ago the UK Social Value Bank. We did it with social landlords, and we did it very much looking at well-being, and well-being was what was driving our approach. There are many ways in which you can look at social value. People look at it from a kind of an approach around how much does the state save, or people look at it from approach of, as we do, around well-being, or people also look at it of approach of getting people around the table and saying, if you were to have this outcome, how much would you pay for it? And they're all really interesting ways of approaching that question of social value. But if I'm honest, I don't really care how much the state saves. Others do, but for me, what really matters is the well-being of people's lives, and that's for me where we need to focus. I think a few other things I would just quickly say. I think Oscar Wilde said in one of his books that a cynic knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And I think we really are living in a cynical world. I think we focus far too much on price and cost, and we don't actually focus on the value about what we do and how we drive it. And one of the reasons we created the Social Value Bank for housing associations and social landlords was because we needed to find a way for them to be able to describe their kind of social purpose and what they're driving from their social value. Because when they were looking at how they do their work, how they're going to invest their resources in the future, they were doing it purely from an economic model. And it wasn't good enough. We found that organizations were not investing in neighborhoods and in major regeneration because actually the financials didn't stack up. But as soon as they started looking at the social value and putting that into their calculations, we started to see some change. So for me, social value isn't about how do we say hurrah, how good are we? Actually, social value is how do we have information that we can put alongside economic information to make the best decision? Because it isn't just the economy that should drive our purpose and the decisions that we take and our money. It should be the impact that we have on the lives of people living in those communities now and in the future.
Thank you very much, Andrew. You can see your passion equally coming through there. Now I'd like to move to Ron Lang, please, to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to join the session. I really am delighted to be here. I wish I wasn't following Andrew, I have to say. Quite a passionate speech there, so I'll do my best. So just a brief introduction to myself. So Ron Lang, I'm the Impact Director for Value for the Construction Innovation Hub. Just very briefly, the Construction Innovation Hub was born out of the construction sector deal. We're a £72 million UKRI, i.e. government-funded research programme, and we're about halfway through our 4-year programme now. We have a number of themes, but value is the one that I lead and the one that I want to talk to. And I'm not going to apologise for that in this setting, which is great. So I really wanted to just kind of describe a little bit about one of our main initiatives called the Value Toolkit. Some of you may have seen some of the social media traffic around this particular initiative. But I wanted to talk about why now and why we're doing it and where it came from. So really, as I said, the construction sector deal was really the birth of our programme. And there was a specific ask in the construction sector deal for this industry-wide definition of value, with the explicit content that it needs to be about more than cost. Now, that seems quite obvious to those of us on this call and in this setting. I slightly take exception to the assertion there that there is a definition of value, I have to say, so I'll just put that out there. But then nevertheless, there was a need to help the industry to define value more clearly and to have a more consistent approach to how we do that. And that's certainly where we've come from. At the same time, through the Transforming Infrastructure Performance Report, the Infrastructure and Projects Authority also identified a need for greater emphasis on procuring for value, as the phrase was. And similarly, Transport Infrastructure Efficiency Strategy, which is quite the mouthful, also identified similarly the need for investment decisions that are based on whole life costs and on benefits and on consideration of broader outcomes. And that word outcomes, I think, will come out time and time again in this discussion. So most recently, the Construction Leadership Council published the Roadmap to Recovery. This is how we're going to come out the other side of this pandemic. And there was explicit reference there to the work that we're doing around the Value Toolkit, which I really think emphasised the opportunity that we have coming out the other side of this. So very briefly, and I can't do it justice perhaps in the time that we have, but the Value Toolkit is quite simply trying to provide a structured approach to how you embed value-based decision-making in built environment portfolios, programmes and projects. And ultimately, it's how we drive better social, environmental and economic outcomes from the delivery and the operation of the assets that we build. So there are three key elements to this, really. There's a whole thing around value definition, and I mentioned that reference to the construction sector deal. So how do we help clients to be clear about what it is they actually want, to make sure they've considered all of those people that they affect and that critically they rely on, and that's a slightly different angle. And how do we make sure that they communicate that to the supply chain to enable the supply chain to come with solutions that genuinely add value, don't reduce or minimize cost? Secondly, there is a whole piece of work around client and market approach. So how do we make sure clients actually approach delivery of construction assets in a way that actually facilitates the achievement of those outcomes? It's very well to say what we're trying to achieve, but actually if we try and deliver in the same old ways, we will not achieve those outcomes quite clearly. And then finally, a critical piece of the puzzle, evaluation and measurement. How do we make sure we have a consistent and robust approach to actually evaluating performance and evaluating things before we build them, and then critically to monitoring them in use and make sure that we genuinely drive this data-driven feedback loop? We're still not there quite clearly as a sector. So I don't want to spend a huge amount of time more. I just wanted to say that we probably have more than 120 people now working directly on this work. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's taken a lot of the good thinking that's already happening across the piece, across the sector and beyond the sector. Some of the names we're working with, CLC I mentioned, Association of Consultancy and Engineering, Construction Excellence, SECA, UK GBC, Social Value UK, CIOB, REBA, RICS, and so on and so on. This really has been quite an eye-opening experience, and the amount of people that are willing to contribute to this work. So I think I just wanted to end really actually on a slight pivot. So Bev mentioned the 500 billion in construction spend. And I think my view on this, to end on a slightly pointy note, is that we really start to have to take seriously both the responsibility and the opportunity we have to make the use of that and leverage better outcomes for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron. It's great. I'm surprised there are no more comments already in the Q&A from some of the first two speakers. Lots of interesting things coming up. So now we're going to fly quickly across to the other side of the Atlantic and welcome Fan Yu Lin. Unmute, Fan Yu.
Hi, everyone. Hi, now I'm here in New York. I'm very happy to be here to be part of the Bristol Housing Festival and in this discussion with the expert and audience who care about the value of social value. I'm an entrepreneur and architect. Currently, I'm also the CEO of Fluxus, a construction technology company and social enterprise, committed to improving the quality of life through a new way of delivering sustainable and affordable homes that through leveraging networks of global partners and innovations in smart city technologies, green building materials, industrialization and digitalization of construction. I'm also engaged in global organizations. I serve on the World Economic Forum's Global Internet of Things Council to help shape the global agenda and steward the forum's effort in building trust and advance public-private partnership on the IoT technologies. So recently I've been working with the forum on the accelerating digital transformation, infrastructure 4.0 in the context of affordable housing. Most recently, this is why I'm in this discussion with the expert who care about this issue. I started the World Home Foundation. It is a new initiative which will be officially launched next year. The foundation will support philanthropic effort and impact investment to accelerate sustainable way of providing and financing affordable housing, affordable urban housing and humanitarian homes, these two areas of focus. Because housing is at the center of many social issues that we're experiencing. Feeling safe, stable, and secure are the most basic human needs. So we believe providing homes for the world will also be the huge opportunity to be the driver of change for the better, and to measure, to manifest the social value in the context of solving housing crisis. I think it is at the heart of why the foundation comes into being at this time, and it will be our guiding compass to what and how we are going to deliver this mission together with global collaborators and partners to provide homes for the world in this new area we are already living in. And a housing sector has a far-reaching impact on our global economy from the supply side to the demand side throughout the home delivery value chain. And I'm super excited to learn about UK's implementation from the public sector, from the supply side procurement practice, which goes beyond, I think, the models, the implementation best practices can extract to be scaled outside of the supply side and also outside of the boundaries of the community and nations originally started. So I'm super excited to engage with this discussion with all the panelists, experts, and audiences who is working on this promoting and implementing value of social value for housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Fan Yu. We're delighted to have your perspective on our panel today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to introduce Jacqueline Miller.
Hello, thank you, Bev. I'm Jacqueline Miller. I'm Commercialisation Development Manager with Bristol City Council. I've worked with the local authority for many years in commissioning, procurement and commercialisation. I led on Bristol's social value policy, looking at best and next practice from the public sector and the private sector, and understanding how we can really start to draw in that practice within the context of a local authority. What that lent to was us looking at how we leverage our buying power. And in Bristol, we're looking at a spend of about £360 million per year with third-party contractors, and how we ensure that we deliver benefit back to our communities. So part of that led to us looking at how we then start to measure and monitor and quantify that value. So I've used a lot of the research of some of our panel members today to help inform and shape that. What we do know is that it's still very much an emerging science, as it were. We're still very much learning. We're seeing some really beneficial impacts for the city in terms of our communities and the local economy, and how we influence certain behaviours around creating local jobs, using the local supply chain. What we have seen, though, is the really exciting bit, is a shift in the narrative from what are we buying, what are we paying for, and how much does it cost, to what are the outcomes? What are the outcomes we need to deliver, and what is the impact of that? And the exciting piece of work that we're doing within the project that we're speaking about here today, and with some of the other events at the Housing Festival this week, are around delivering value back to our communities, not just building houses and roofs, but looking at how we deliver housing that's of good quality, that's affordable, that's safe, that ensures that the people that live in those homes are connected with our communities and our communities are connected with them, and how we support people within those communities. So really starting to take a real strategic view around how we work together in partnership across agencies, from the point of pre-development and planning all the way through to the build, whether that is using modern methods of construction, which is what we're talking about now, or traditional builds. Is how we've got the right mix to meet the needs of the people in our communities in an affordable, and I don't mean just affordable at the point of occupation, I mean driving down the costs to make it affordable and sustainable, so that we've got homes that are fit for the future. And, you know, just to say, Bev, I'm really proud of the work that we're doing together, and I really hope that we can continue to build on all of our work to ensure that we continue to grow the homes that we've got in the city and the benefit back to the people living in those homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And certainly Bristol are among the pioneers in getting us to where we need to go on this topic. And so congratulations into you and your team. Okay, last but not least, back to Jez to say hello.
Thank you very much, Bev, and thank you to the other panelists. If I can start, so my name's Jez. I think some of you may know me. I'm the project director of the Bristol Housing Festival. I'm really proud of kind of the debate. And as Jacqueline just referred to, I think this is partly about these events are about trying to change the narrative. How do we gather, how do we coalesce around a shared set of objectives and understanding how we really deliver that and drive that within the sort of existing statutory frameworks that we have. But I think for me, when we look at social value, really what we're talking about is how do we build the wisdom into our decision making? And the social value element really is saying, well, how can we start to really understand the value of what we're buying? And as Ron was referring to, not just looking at the price. And the reason I think for us in the housing festivals has become so critical is that when you start to look at something like modern methods of construction, you know, new ways of building, new ways of procuring homes and delivering those, particularly into the affordable sector, immediately one of the key barriers is this challenge of cost. And so what tends to happen, we discovered quite quickly, was that whilst you're looking at MMC, a new supply chain of homes for the UK that arguably could become a real answer to our sustainability and climate crisis, arguably could become part of a new supply of homes that can tackle the economic booms and bust cycles because you've got a manufactured solution, and arguably could become part of the solution around how do we tackle some of that construction skills crisis and transition and train more people in these new industries. Suddenly you're back to this, but is it more expensive? And the honest truth with a lot of MMC at the moment, it is, but we're not comparing apples with apples. If we're talking about a beautifully designed, high quality finished, zero carbon home, we should expect that on one level to cost more than a traditional built home that may perform to a lesser quality. In the same way, when we buy a car, we recognize there's something about the performance and the quality that we're buying. We make a decision, not just on the price. And I think for me that what we're really driving at here is how within the construct of our homes, the construct of how we build and we think, and that wisdom of decision making, how can we start to procure around this notion that what we're really investing in is how to improve the mental and physical health of our population. And what we see at the moment all too often is a huge disconnect between the policy level of talking about climate crisis and zero carbon goals and sustainability challenges, and the ability to actually drive that policy and that strategy into delivery. And that isn't because we've got lots of people that are trying to bypass that. It's because some of our existing frameworks aren't yet interconnected around that policy through to delivery. And into that space, there is this Social Value Act. Now, there's probably differing views about the Act and how it should have been drafted, et cetera, et cetera. But my personal view is the Social Value Act is a bit of a gem, and it sits there, but it has not yet matured. And I think COVID-19 is showing that we desperately need a way to build more wisdom into our decision making. And my hope and belief, and certainly building the work that Bristol City Council is always already doing, I think there's a gathering momentum here to actually relook at the Social Value Act, relook at how it's being applied, relook at how local authorities and national governments can use that to really drive. And again, here is the key issue, the outcomes that we need, looking at things like the whole lifetime costs of a home, not just the upfront costs, looking at how that delivers clean air and zero carbon agendas, not just looking at, and things like landfill. A great analogy that someone spoke to me the other day was when we're looking at construction, who values how much of the landfill is given off from a project? Very difficult at the moment to really look at that, because who gets the value? Well, arguably, that value can be captured, it can be understood. It's about clean air and carbon, but we need the wisdom into that decision making. So for me, the Social Value Act hasn't yet had its day, it's maturing, but there is a real gathering storm now around the urgency and the need to redesign how we design our procurement strategies. Bev, I'm going to hand back to you on that note.
Thank you, Jez. Well, what a fantastic panel. I'm so excited to get into the debate. There's lots of questions coming through now on the Q&A. If I can just pose one or two opening suggestions to the panel, which picks up some of the comments in the Q&A and some of the comments you've all made. The reason we at the IED started our research is because we wanted to find examples of good practices that we could share amongst the members, you know, from the north to the south, east to west. That was really hard because nobody is capturing this stuff in a unified way. So you couldn't compare apples with apples in terms of how something was measured and monetized, as well as the different types of construction as well, picking up on what Jez said. If things are being developed in one area, they weren't being shared with other areas. So it seemed to us that the landscape was really siloed. And one of the things that's happened at the IED since we launched is lots of people have reached out to us and now we're starting to kind of connect up. But it still seems that there's a bit of a supply side and demand side gap. And that's one of the reasons we call for a centre of excellence to be a sort of repository for this data so that we can all up our performance and learn from each other. One of the things that really surprised me was it was a struggle to find any good examples of robust, authentic community engagement with the beneficiaries who would be receiving the social value activities. There were some, but they were far and few between. So we couldn't benchmark whether they were good or not so good or whatever. And to the social value conference, I remember somebody described social value could sometimes be the unwanted Christmas present that was given to people and obviously you can't really give it back. So I would love to see much more co-creation around the outcomes that we all want to achieve. So that was something that I found was really quite disappointing in a way that it was being done to people more often than with and alongside those people. So there have been a couple of comments about how do we make sure that the outcomes that we are going to procure in construction at all stages actually reflect the needs of those end beneficiaries on the ground. And of course, it is rising up the procurement agenda now with points up to 25% in some areas in the weighting of tenders. So it's a commercial imperative as well as a moral imperative for industry to get this right. So if any panelists want to pick up on any of those, you can put your thumbs up, and I'm just going to give you a quick look at the questions coming in. Nicola is saying, why is it taking so long for social value to be held as a priority? That's quite interesting, especially given the Social Value Act is 7 years old, because there is an economic cost if we ignore it. If you take that up to the macro level, that's possibly why we have so many left behind communities. There's a specific comment about Bristol, which I'll come on to later on. Somebody is asking about sharing favourite examples of added social value. That might be something we'll come back to at the end. So there's a few pointers for starting the discussion. Thumbs up to my panel if you would like to come in on. Okay, I'm sure that all the panel probably want to talk for the next half an hour. I'll come to Andrew first because you had the most excited thumb.
Thank you. So, okay, folks, let's give ourselves a break, first of all. So yes, there's urgency and we've got to get on with it. But also, we are only we're not even 10 years into this, into the kind of whole discipline of kind of understanding social value, measuring it, procuring it, all of that kind of stuff. We are up against centuries of kind of economic evaluation that's been honed, it's been debated, it's been researched to death. It's, so let's give ourselves a break, but let's not be complacent. So that's my first plea. We are maturing this approach. We are learning how to do it. And actually, if you can't find the examples out there, I would suggest you're not looking hard enough, because actually I can come up with a whole number of different examples where things are really, really exciting. Things are being done in really interesting ways. What we're probably not doing is kind of following them up with a kind of an evidence creation piece of work. And maybe we've got to get better at that. And actually, I would suggest to you that people that work in housing are pretty evidence poor and pretty evidence light in what they do. So I've got some brilliant examples of where there's been huge consultation going on in communities about major regeneration and estate-based regeneration. It's been to ballots, it's been to votes. They've worked out what's important to them. And those priorities are being turned into social value scoring, into social value statements, and they're being built into the procurement of joint ventures. This stuff is going to take some time. If we think we can deliver social value within 1 year, then we are kidding ourselves. We do have to remember that actually changing lives, working alongside people to co-produce those outcomes and then to help them and to work alongside them is going to take some time. We talk a lot about patient capital, and I think we have to start talking about patient outcomes as well. Because unless we do, we're going to continuously flog ourselves for not doing it quick enough, when actually sometimes doing it too quickly doesn't actually drive the impact and the systemic and the fundamental change that people actually need. But what construction gives us the opportunity is because it is a long-term game. Therefore, if we get it right, we understand what matters and we build that into how we do it, and then we enforce it in contract delivery, we have that golden thread between what's needed to then what's delivered and what's in the future. Then actually we'll start getting the prizes of that change that people so desperately need.
Thank you, Andrew. Jess, you had your thumb up, and then Ron, you want to come in too.
Yeah, I think it's to echo Drew's comments, really, that there is something here to celebrate. It's not just, that we are talking about moving from a very transparent, clear model of financial accounting, where it's relatively straightforward, but to look at an understanding, comprehension of what we're buying and why we're buying it. And so it's a very kind of binary process. The moment you move into outcomes driven, looking at how you value things and how you create a process around the delivery of that decision, it is complex. And of course, one of the problems is that if you get it wrong, you create a whole number of unintended consequences down the line that then you regret. So I think we need to recognize that we're at the beginning of this journey, and there are lots of problems and imperfections with the current system. But I think we also need to be celebrating the fact that we are on the journey. That there are councils like Bristol and other councils around the country. There's the work that CIH are doing. It's really started to drive, and it's driving a change both of mentality, which is about the narrative, it's about the understanding, but it's also about the methodology and the models that are coming out. And I think the point, Bev, you make is critical in this, that we need an ability to really learn from all of the different activity that's happening across the country to drive that methodology and that model forwards, which is, again, why it's so important that CIH are doing what they're doing. So I think we're all impatient. But the truth is, we need to get better at looking at where we're seeing progress and recognize that to bring the lawyers and the accountants and some of that really important process into this, we need to do this really well and really wisely. And I think we're on that journey now.
Yep. Ron, can I come to you next?
Absolutely. I'm really pleased with Drew's yellow hat, but I'm going to put a black one on just for a minute. I think on the journey that we have been on in the hub with the Value Toolkit, it's been quite interesting. So I'm reading down some of the questions in the question and answer there, and there are quite a lot of questions which bring me to a point that I'm becoming to be quite passionate about, which is there is a tendency, and we were on this path perhaps 12 months ago, to try and make everything very automated and to try and categorize everything, and that tension really exists between the need to have aggregation of data, and Bev, you alluded to that, and the ability to look at loads of data and put it together and understand what good looks like. But on the other hand, the need to have flexibility. And the more we look at what outcomes mean and who you need to have involved in those discussions and how different it is for every project in every region and every type of client, the more we need to build that flexibility in. So we're still on that journey of understanding how you can make things standardized and have fun and easy ways to categorize things at the same time as allowing people the time and the flexibility to actually define what value and outcomes are to them on a particular project. So I just wanted to get in early really on that kind of tension between aggregation of data and flexibility to make the right decisions, and just see if anyone's got any thoughts on that.
Okay, well, while people are thinking about that, the questions are coming thick and fast. So I'm just going to do a quick straw poll of our panel on a question from Lisa, who's saying, should public bodies be required now to account for rather than simply consider social value? My view on that is it should be reporting from all stages of the process, right from design to completion and management of assets. It should be reported annually and shared and captured, because otherwise, how are we ever going to improve it? So that's my quick, absolutely should be mandatory. Anybody in the panel want to, is anybody going to disagree whether we should have mandatory reporting? No.
Absolutely not. I was just going to suggest very quickly, sorry, just if anybody is not familiar with the Capitals approach, and particularly the Capitals Coalition as an organisation, that's exactly what they're trying to drive across global economies, about how we report on more than just our financial health as an economy, but actually the way we look after our citizens, the way we look after our environment. So I think we are moving this direction. So I'm going to put Drew's yellow hat back on. We are definitely moving in the right direction, but absolutely we should be reporting on these things. This is what we're here for.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to come to Fanny, who just put her hand up. So perhaps, Fanny, you can answer this question from the chat and also tell us what you were going to say. The question was, are there any countries or cities who are ahead of the UK on social value that we can learn from? So over to you for both a response to that one as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's related, and I absolutely think you guys are on the journey that's worth celebrating, and UK is very avant-garde in regard to the value of social values implementation in housing industry. There are many social environmental governance and also traditionally corporate social responsibility program that's been very mature, and that's those are the globally recognized commitments that's embraced in the community, business community, who want to be the global leader and want to have a competitive advantage for their core businesses. And also in impact investment space across the globe, there's a triple bottom line standard. There's accounting framework about a universal environmental, social, and governance metrics. Most recently, the World Economic Forum just 1 month ago has, together with the Big Four accounting firm, has released the new metrics. It's like more like a coordination of existing standard around the world, and they put it together. It's a global urge for very large corporations to embrace it and to be accountable, be the reporting. I think this is absolutely the trend, and because we are experiencing this crisis all together, and we are creating a new common language. We are creating this new language where we can have a conversation about the value of social value, about sustainability across the globe, across the industry. But very importantly, how to tailor it for the housing innovation, for providing affordable housing. I think from the public sector, because the buying power is enormous. So for public sector to take initiative from a policy perspective is very effective. It's a driver for all the industry players to come up with how to tailor it throughout the life cycle of the construction project. But eventually, because the UK is taking this initiative, all businesses around the world want to do business with the government of UK. They have to comply, they have to compete, they have to reinvent themselves to become better. So I think it's a very good starting point, and it can be transformed to many other cities around the world, and in demand side as well, beyond the supply side procurement.
Thank you very much, Fanyu. It's good to hear that. And I've been told that the UK construction sector is definitely ahead of many other sectors in the country on its thinking and activities around social value. Jackie, I'm going to come to you in a minute if you'd like to answer the Bristol specific questions in the chat. But if I may, to give you some time to think about that, because it's quite some niche questions there, but really important ones. If I may take Chair's prerogative and respond to Nicole's question or comment, because it is the thing that makes me most angry. Nicole says there's no common definition of social value. How do we decide what matters? For me, I don't really care about a definition, in that we all basically understand what we're talking about. For me, the essential thing at the sharp end is what activities count. And in our research, we had a lot of examples of what I would call good or normal business practice being counted as social value. For example, adherence to the prompt payment code, anti-slavery measures, internal equality and diversity initiatives. And these were all ticking the box and getting values for social value in the tenders. And to me, that's like commercial reality. And as Fanny said, there is a huge opportunity here for the supply side to differentiate themselves in what they deliver that makes a difference. So, you know, those few points could be the difference between winning a massive tender and, being able to retain and grow jobs and employment in this country. So to me, there is both this social good part and the commercial good, and they're not opposed to each other. We all win if we can get it right. So Jackie, you happy to pick up the couple of questions on Bristol specific ones here around land and was it about community-led home tenders and self-build and so on, and incentives for social value in that sphere?
I'll do my best, Bev. I think what I would say is there can be no one size fits all. And that's for a number of reasons. I think we want the public sector and the private sector and the voluntary community sector to work together to genuinely deliver community benefit, because they're committed to doing that, not because we've got legislation and policy that tells them to do it and that it's driven by numbers. And I think I would pick up on what Drew said earlier, about well-being. Some of these benefits that we're seeing coming through, especially for some of our citizens that are the most vulnerable, are really difficult to quantify. So whilst we are seeing organisations increasingly quantify their social value in notional monetary terms, there is a lot of benefit and value that is very much an emerging space in terms of metrics that can monitor and quantify them. So I think there's a danger in becoming preoccupied with reporting and numbers, because actually, some of these initiatives that we've seen in Bristol, and I can only speak about what happens in Bristol, but I know a lot of really good stuff happens in other cities around the UK, is about changing people's lives. It really is about giving people homes in which they feel safe and they're supported, and they can really travel a distance in terms of their own personal well-being. So whilst I don't disagree, you know, that maybe legislation should go further, maybe we should have to report. Actually, there is a danger that we miss some of the real impactful benefits because of those things. So I think we will get there. And I think legislation will start to kind of constrain us and set a direction of travel. But actually, I'm really pleased that the legislation that we've got in terms of public sector bodies is actually quite light. It does require us to consider. But I know in Bristol, we've taken that piece of legislation and we've gone way much further. Just to pick up on the piece around policy, we've got policies outside of commission procurement that do start to introduce social value, but that is very much, you know, a moving piece. And again, what I wouldn't want to do is see any sort of disadvantage conveyed because we've taken a piece of legislation and policy that works in one space and we've tried to shoehorn other opportunities into it. So I think what I would say around that is we just need more understanding of the impact, positive and potentially negative, that may have in starting to build policy around social value. Social value should be an enabler that helps us to achieve our objectives, not a tick box exercise, and not something that, you know, people do because they feel they have to. We want organisations to work together to deliver community benefit because it's the right thing to do. You're on mute, Bev.
You'd think after 6 months of doing nothing but online, we would all have this down a pat, but I still forget to do that. While you have the floor, Jackie, are Bristol going to have a look at putting social value or some kind of community value on your decisions around self-build?
There are discussions around all policies at the moment. So things like grant awards, and when we bid for grant funding, we're looking at how social value can be an enabler within that. Yeah, so I think watch this space. I think, you know, we've started with procurement, and that's worked well, but it's still very much evolving. And I'm mindful of we don't know what we don't know. Yeah. So, you know, softly, but absolutely, I'm really proud that we've gone way beyond legislation in Bristol. And are seeing some other policies kind of catching up with that. Thank you.
There's a huge variation across the country in how deeply social value is embedded in design and procurement and monitoring. A whole range of different standards and levels and different tools being adopted. For me, it's like, unless it's measured, it being the outcome, if we get to outcomes, we're having enough trouble delivering outputs that are tangible, I think, at the minute. But if we can move towards outcome oriented procurement and delivery, we surely have to measure it, because otherwise the opportunity for it to be a tick box exercise on behalf of the supply side is much, much greater. Because if you're not going to get enforced and you're not going to get monitored, well, where's the incentive there? If it forms part of your, even if it forms part of your legal contracts, quite often we see best endeavour clauses which mitigate against failure to deliver social value. So to me, unless we can do that kind of rigorous monitoring and sharing, only then can we start benchmarking, well, who does actually deliver good outcomes. You know, it's not a league table per se, but how can we actually benchmark who are the good performers, so that next time they're tendering for a contract, the public sector buyers have got some kind of evidence base to go on. That's a personal perspective. Anybody from the panel? Oh, Ron, I thought you would like to chip in on that one. And Andrew, good.
And just a really quick one from me. So I think, again, to put a slightly positive spin on that, we're hearing those noises from both central government, but also beyond that sphere, which is that they do want to start to take into account past performance and past delivery of outcomes when they consider future and further tenders. So I think the noises are all good. I think your point around measuring those things is absolutely valid again. And we do recognise the challenges around how you actually contract for outcomes is quite a challenge. And we've got a whole specific piece of work looking at that. But I just wanted to add that certainly the noises that we're hearing. Just to pick up quickly on the policy point, a completely different and again slightly more sort of central and devolved nations view of this. But I think we're trying to use the work we're doing to let's say illuminate for good or for bad whether policy is driving the right behaviours. So part of the process talks about you need to understand what the strategic drivers are, both at a national level within the organisation and at a regional level, and trying to align those things. What this means is that we're not trying to tell those clients at this point, and I'll say at this point, whether they have a good view of value or not. What we're trying to say is actually, if you followed policy properly and you could show a proper golden thread, to use Andrew's language, back to why you have valued things in that certain way and why you've weighted and prioritized things in a certain way, we can start to indicate to government whether their policy is actually driving the right behaviours or not. We've been quite surprised when you dig into policy and say, okay, actually, should there be minimum weightings for some of these things? And obviously we're working across capitals. We very quickly came to the conclusion, no, there's nothing that actually tells you how important these different things are. And that's not a bad thing, because I think it depends on where, again, as I said earlier, the flexibility of where you're building and what you're building. But I certainly think rather than telling clients, and this is the risk, this is what value looks like, and these are the things you should value, Mr. or Mrs. Client, it's about a facilitated process through where they can say, well, based on what I'm being asked to do, based on policy, based on my values, this is what I think I should make decisions based on, and reflect that back and make sure we're continuously shaping that policy. That was all, thanks.
You, Ron, I think there's also something here about, it's not just at the procurement end. We have to start with the planners and the designers, and it's a much more holistic continuum that we have to look at, rather than just the sharp end of, oh, I'm going to go and build something now.
No, absolutely. So we had exactly this. So you remember that the phrase procuring for value was where a lot of our work started. We've almost moved away from that terminology, because actually a lot of the stuff we're talking about is before we even know what we're building or whether we need it. We're talking about what is the outcome we're trying to achieve. Is it to get somebody from one side of a river to another? Well, is the solution a tunnel? Is it a bridge? Is it actually going round? Is it actually making sure people don't need to cross the river because they can work for it? So we need to understand what the problem is we're trying to actually solve before we jump straight into a solution. I completely agree with that, Bev. And that's slightly why we're avoiding the word procurement in some spheres.
Yeah. It's just that, procurement is the sharp end of whatever the eventual decision is. But I think we're fully aligned. Andrew, do you want to come in?
I'm just going to say that it's the outcomes that matter in all of this, and we have to have a way in which we can both forecast that, understand it, plan for it, and also a way in which we can measure it, demonstrate it's happened, and use those feedback loops to then inform our future practice. And that's challenging, but it's not difficult. It's not overly difficult. It's not beyond the collective wisdom of all of us to be able to make that work, and to do it in a robust and methodologically consistent way. And I think that's part of the problem, because I think I'm really concerned that people just look at social value and just say snake oil. What is this? Does it really have meaning in my life? Are you just selling me snake oil? Do I see the impact that you say you're going to create in my life and around me? And unless we can answer those questions, then we're always going to be talking in some kind of abstract concept about social value. It's actually got to have real meaning in people's lives, and that does require us to start to behave differently. And I think the thing about contracts, I think your report picked this up, Bev, that unless you actually enforce stuff in contracts, then why are you doing it? And in some respects, we just got to get sharper at those kinds of things. If you have a social value requirement in your procurement, then why is it not a drop dead KPI? It should be. And a drop dead KPI for people whose motivation is profit actually starts them to pay attention, because their profit is actually linked to those KPIs, and they will start to lose it if they don't deliver the social value. But the other bit of this is about collaboration, because actually no one agency or no one organization or no one in any supply chain or any construction or any housing is actually going to deliver all of that social value. It takes collaboration across a whole range of different people over a period of time to be able to drive change. And that collaboration has to start from the people who live in communities, you and I and our neighbours, and people who experience some of the worst poverty and health inequalities, the people who are supporting them, the people who are building around them, people who are managing their homes into the future. And in that, we have some choices to make. And I think what's really interesting to see how the social value and the community wealth building agendas are beginning to kind of circle around each other. And I think there's some really big opportunities for us to start thinking quite differently about how we're using our spending to drive change in communities, and how we're doing that alongside people, not to them.
Yep, here to much more collaboration for sure. Fanny, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, I just want to mention the beauty of this the value of social value is centered around the people, and the beneficiaries we are talking about here is not only the residents, the communities, the employees. So it's really multi-stakeholder value creation. And here, when we are talking about how to deliver the value, how to tailor the social value to the needs of beneficiaries, we may also consider how to make the competition between large corporations who already have those capital or resources versus those smaller, very mission-driven startups or smaller communities who has to collaborate on this those ecosystem or even a project-based practice. So maybe create capacity building resources for them will be core elements to make the whole process more effective.
Yeah, thank you, Fanny. Jess?
Yeah, I just wanted to give an example, I think, of some of the things that Drew is referring to about the ability to spend. So it strikes me, particularly when you start to look at local government and local authorities and the impacts of social value, one of the key assets that local authorities have is land. You know, that there's a huge amount of value locked up in that land. And you know, one of the things that was interesting was we got into the Housing Fest was talking to some of the developers that wanted to build on that land. And they were quite frustrated because often in a commercial market, if you are tendering for land and it's about the highest capital receipt, of course, the risk is that by the time they've bought that land and then they're looking at their viability, what gets value engineered out of that process is, you know, the ground source heat pumps or the ability to live more affordable homes or the quality of the, you know, the urban environment, the street design. So I think there is a real opportunity looking at how, again, using that social value, you can start to really redress the fact that actually there is an asset here has value. And again, by driving the outcomes that we want to achieve with this piece of land, we can then procure against that. So it's really challenging that whole economic cycle. It isn't just about the money coming in, it's also about the way that the assets that are being used and deployed to deliver those end objectives. Because of course, one thing cities cannot do is create more land. So that land becomes a really, I think, interesting challenge around how it's used to drive social value and demonstrate that back, as you know, has been said 2 or 3 times, to those communities so they get the benefit of the wisdom of that decision making.
Yep. So I'm conscious of time. I'm conscious there's loads of questions that we haven't fully answered or haven't answered at all in the Q&A. So apologies for my disgusting chairing of this event that I haven't been able to satisfy everybody. But I do want to come around the panel very quickly, 20 seconds to answer one of the most interesting questions that was raised. What does success mean to you if we get this right? So and I'm going to go, I think, in the order that we started. Andrew first. What does success mean for you?
Success means the improvement of well-being in our communities, driven by an appreciation of social and economic value together, and not just dominated by economic value.
Okay, good stab for 10 seconds. Ron, have a go for you. What does it look like?
A slightly different angle. So transparency. One of the things I'm most excited about is how we can drive transparency in how decisions are being made. So I think a lot of the initiatives that are around, and certainly our initiative is to try and help people to articulate very clearly what they're going to make decisions on the basis of, and that transparency, I think, is what's driving me.
Thank you. Fanny?
Yes, I think success will mean we are already on this journey. It's not the outcome, but it's the process. We are creating a new common ground, a new understanding with a new language that we hope we all speak, we all communicate with a heart-centered conversation at a global level. So the intentional and measurable impact can be woven into the heart of the home delivery value chain across the globe. It is not easy, but we are here and people care about it, and it's implemented in local levels, national levels. It can help us direct more capital where it is needed to provide homes.
Good, thank you. Jacqueline, What's your perspective on the destination of success?
For me, it's about consultation, engagement, collaboration, and communities where people feel connected to decision making and what's happening for them and to them and around them, and they're shaping that. If we can achieve that, Bev, I'll be happy.
Jez, last one for you.
I think for me, in the context of housing, that we understand how to drive that wisdom of decision making, that we can demonstrate that we are delivering new homes and new communities where we understand how to drive that economic well-being agenda, which is about the health, mental and physical health and well-being of our population, and we can measure that to then inform further decision making and drive that agenda.
Thank you. My own 2 penneth is I'd like to change somebody's life. So, and then do it all around the world. So panelists, you've been absolutely brilliant. We could, I know, have this discussion for hours and days and weeks, I am sure. Thank you all very much for giving up your time and your experience and your views. To all our participants, thanks for dialing in. Don't forget, there are loads more things going on during the Housing Festival. You can sign up for them on the website at bristolhousingfestival.org.uk. Please stay engaged with the debate, stay connected, because if we're going to crack this thing, we can only do it together. Thank you very much. Have a very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.